Cecily Cicada, 2021 edition, by Kidda Helmetag Murdoch and Patsy Helmetag. In her dreary earthen hole, neath the sassafras tree on Hudacoper Street in Washington, D.C., lived a hopeful nymph cicada, waiting for the time she could crawl up top and feel the sunshine. The last thing she remembered before digging her hole was her solemn mamma saying, "Cecily, be bold. Be patient, dear, and persevere, and never do give up. For in 17 years you'll get back to the top. In 17 years you'll know what to do, and something amazing will happen to you." For 17 years she waited day and night for the time and temperature to be just right. Cecily ate roots, then ate some more, but eating roots was such a bore, so she was stalwart and passed the time doing 17 things that don't fit in this rhyme. For while she awaited that far-off day, she had to be clever and learn to play and entertain herself till the soil felt right. At 64 degrees, she could crawl up to the light. Once, when thinking of things to do, a friendly worm came passing through. He asked, "What are you waiting? Why are you waiting down in this hole?" She said, "That is something I cannot control. In fact, I wish I could go up with you, but I must wait. My waiting's not through. In 17 years will come the day when I can go outside and play." One morning in May she awoke with a start. This was the moment she knew in her heart. Something she knew she must get to the top. She began digging and did not stop. Her head popped out in the dim moonlight, but her climbing continued that starry night. After so many years she felt so free. She climbed up the bark of the sassafras tree. When she got near the top, she suddenly froze. She felt stiff from her nose down to her toes. She couldn't move. She was stuck in one spot. She tried to crawl and found she could not. She wiggled and wriggled with all of her might, but no matter what, her feet held tight. She thought, "I have to get out of here." Her body trembled with outright fear. She began to shake. She couldn't stop shaking when all of a sudden she heard something breaking. She heard a rip and then a crack and felt the night air on her back. She tried moving her feet and found they would, then took a step and found she could. But why had she been stuck in one place? She looked up and saw the dried brown case. Her new self was pale with wings that were green. Her skin was translucent with a beautiful sheen. When the sun came up on the being so sleepin', Cecily's color began to deepen. Suddenly a question entered her mind. How can I leave part of me behind? That withered brown case used to be me, but now it's dried up and stuck to a tree. She saw from her branch a most curious thing, a creature like she was with elegant wings. You look puzzled, but look around. There are hundreds of us crawling out of the ground, climbing up trees and leaving our past, spreading our wings to embrace life at last. We're leaving our old selves stuck on the trees while we fly with the ladybugs, robins, and bees. Oh, it's a wonderful thing to fly. Jump off that branch, give it a try. It was amazing. Her mom had been right, as Cecily found on her very first flight. You know how long it is if you have long to wait when that thing finally happens. Isn't it great? If you've been in a dark hole, nothing is duller. Imagine emerging surrounded by color. Below her were flowers and beautiful plants, birds and dragonflies, spiders and ants. Children were playing in Glover Park, and parents were dragging them home before dark. For 2 days her red eyes took in all the sights, and the sounds and the smells of the springtime delights. They were savory flowers that smelled so sweet, and tasty new leaves for her to eat. Then after 3 days came a glorious sound from the bushes and treetops all around. From male cicadas both high and low, a chorus of voices began to grow. For some humans, it might sound like a buzz, but Cecily knew just what it was: a beautiful, joyful, thankful song of creatures who'd lived in the ground for too long. Then she heard the sweetest voice, one that made her heart rejoice. Cecily looked up. To her surprise was another cicada with stars in his eyes. When you see a cicada, please give her a smile, 'cause you may not see that one again for a while. Just look at the grown-up who's reading to you. When the cicadas come back, you'll be grown up too. This type of cycle. Currently, we are living through the emergent stage of one of the most interesting creatures out there. I, of course, am talking about the periodic cicada. Every year, we see and hear cicadas. Most of the time, they are from a group of insects called Neotabicen, or the dog day cicadas. We see these cicadas every year, even though their life cycle is 2 to 5 years depending on species. They are called dog day cicadas because they appear around when Sirius, the dog star, rises just before the sun. This is around late July, and it's usually the hottest and muggiest time of year. So if you ever hear about dog days or dog days of summer, that's what it means. It's those very hot, muggy, late summer days. Periodic cicadas are related, but they have a much longer life cycle. Most of the periodic cicadas have a 17-year life cycle. Some of them, however, have a 13-year life cycle. Okay, that's a super long time. Okay, let's learn a little bit about the periodic cicada and why they might have such a long life cycle. One early researcher that is also important to the history of Washington, D.C., is a man named Benjamin Banneker. Um, Mr. Banneker was involved in the original mapping of the boundary that became Washington, D.C., so that diamond shape that is Washington, D.C., he helped to map all of that. Right? And one of the reasons he was useful in that is he had a lot of astronomical knowledge. So he could figure out where exactly they were on the planet or around Washington, D.C., so they could map these straight-lined edges that became Washington, D.C. He was a self-taught natural historian who became well known for those astronomical observations and calculations. Using this knowledge, he published a number of almanacs throughout his life. Um, an almanac is basically a collection of essays around an annual calendar, not always having to do with, sometimes the political or natural history, but the core of an almanac is an annual calendar containing important dates and statistical information such as astronomical data, you know, full moons, eclipses, that sort of thing, as well as tide tables, so you could know when the tide was rising and falling, because that, of course, is related to the moon. Mr. Banneker also became a correspondent of Thomas Jefferson, who deeply respected him and his accomplishments. Mr. Banneker accomplished all of this while being a self-taught scientist and while being a free black man during a time that was unfortunately not the most common thing. Because of his race, not everyone respected him or his accomplishments as they might otherwise. In fact, Mr. Banneker was one of the first American naturalists to write about the periodic cicada. Specifically, he wrote about Brood X because he was from this area. He was from kind of the Ellicott City area. And Brood X was the brood of cicadas that emerged around him. And they are the brood that is emerging this year in 2021. In 1732, when they emerged, Mr. Banneker was newly born and he was a baby. He saw the first emergence he was aware of in 1749, and he repeatedly observed the cicada in 1766, 1783, and finally in the year 1800. Here is a quote. The first great locust year that I can remember was 1749. I was then about 17 years of age when thousands of them came and were creeping up the trees and bushes. I then imagined they came to eat and destroy the fruit of the earth, and would occasion a famine in the land. I therefore began to kill and destroy them, but soon saw that my labor was in vain, and therefore gave over my pretension. Again in the year 1766, which is 17 years after their first appearance, they made a second, and appeared to me to be full as numerous as the first. I then, being about 34 years of age, had more sense than to endeavor to destroy them, knowing they were not so pernicious to the fruit of the earth as I imagined they would be. Again, in the year 1783, which was 17 years since their second appearance to me, they made their third, and they may be expected again in the year 1800, which is 17 years since their third appearance to me, so that, if I may venture to express it, their periodical return is 17 years. But they, like the comets, make but a short stay with us. The female has a sting in her tail as sharp and hard as a thorn, with which she perforates the branches of the trees, and in holes she lays eggs. The branch soon dies and falls, then the egg, by some occult cause, emerges a great depth into the earth, and there continues for the space of 17 years, as aforesaid. I like to I like to forget to inform that if their lives are short, they are merry. They begin to sing or make noise from the first they come out of the earth till they die. Their hindermost parts rot off, and it does not appear to be any pain to them, for they still continue singing on till they die. The most amazing part of that quote to me is that it's so correct. These days we have things like Cicada Safari, which is an app on your iOS or Android phone. Um, Using that, any of us, thousands of us across the country, can observe, record, and upload our observations to a database, to Cicada Safari. Experts then review that information and will verify it. Helps them to study where Brood X is emerging and when. Gives them a lot of data to analyze and to study. Mr. Banneker had none of that. He had his eyes. He observed them for a month and a half that they were around, 3 times, and then wrote that passage. Okay, for the intervening 17 years, he could talk with other naturalists who had observed it, but that was it. Okay, everything he said about their life cycle is correct. All right, so let's take a look at the periodic cicada's life using Benjamin Banneker's words. He said, the first great locust year that I can remember was 1749. Cicadas and locusts both are insects, but cicadas are not locusts, and locusts are not cicadas. We find this sort of thing often in the naming of things. The first Europeans to encounter cicadas likened the huge numbers of them that showed up to their stories of the locust, and thus they gave the cicadas the same name, locust, but they're not the same. Locusts are a type of grasshopper, and they exhibit a behavior called swarming, where locusts from all over the region will come together and gather in a large swarm. There might be millions or even billions of locusts in this swarm, and the swarm sweeps across the land and eats everything in its path. Um, this, as you can imagine, was devastating for agricultural communities. If you have a big field of wheat that is supposed to keep you alive, and the locusts come by and eat it all, that causes hardship, right? Um, and so Western culture has preserved stories of locusts destroying our crops, okay? But cicadas do not swarm. Cicadas are not locusts. Okay, where you find cicadas is where they emerged. They emerge in huge numbers, and it might feel like a swarm, but the behavior is different because cicadas aren't constantly eating everything. Cicadas just emerge to do what they do, and then they die and go away. All right, they do not eat everything in their path. All right, Mr. Banneker said, so that if I may venture to express it, their periodical return is 17 years, but they, like the comets, make but a short stay with us. This is true. Um, One needs to observe and keep records or stories of cicadas over decades to see this pattern, right? Figuring out why this pattern exists is part of a larger story, but Mr. Banneker lived long enough and had good enough observation skills that he was able to see the 7-year cycle occur, right? This type of knowledge is kept in traditional stories. These days, we keep it in our scientific journals and in our on the internet. Right? That's where we store our stories these days. Right? But you have to see it multiple times. If you see something and then 17 years later it happens, that's not a story yet. If another 17 years it happens, now you're getting a trend, and then another 17 years, you can see that cycle, right? Mr. Banneker said, "This is true." Uh, Mr. Banneker said, "The female has a sting in her tail as sharp and hard as a thorn, with which she perforates the branches of the trees, and in the holes she lays eggs. The only reason that a cicada emerges from the ground is to find a mate and to lay eggs so that another generation can be born to carry on the line of cicadas. While underground, the cicadas are in a form called the nymph. Okay, they don't look as formed; they just look a bit creepy crawly. They crawl through the earth, digging holes, and feed on the juices of tree roots. Once the cicada emerges from the earth, they climb up a plant. Their nymph form splits open. The adult pops out of the shell of the nymph, and the adult cicada emerges. When it emerges, because it's been stuffed in that nymph shell, it's soft and it's vulnerable. This is when lots of birds and other animals love to eat them, right? And it's kind of white and hasn't developed its colors. That's how you know it just emerged when you see them white. It's got to pump fluid throughout its body, kind of like swelling of a hose, open up its wings, let them dry and harden so that they can fly, and then it will fly off and seek a mate, seek to lay its eggs. Mr. Banneker said, "I like to forget to inform that if their lives are short, they are merry. They begin to sing or make a noise from the first they come out of the earth till they die. Once they are fully dried, their wings are fully dried and they can support them, the males fly off to find a good high space to perch and begin to sing a song to find a female, to find a someone to have offspring with. Only the males make noise, the females don't. So the males have a special organ called a tympani, which is it's kind of like a big old air sac that they use to make their sounds. Once the female finds a male she likes, she will then go to a tree branch that is about the size of a pencil. She uses a special body part that she has called an ovipositor, or an egg egg placer to cut a hole in the branch, and she deposits her eggs inside of it. Okay, that job done, the adult cicadas fall back down to the earth and die. If you see trees wrapped up, I'll show you some in my garden. That is because those are generally younger trees that have limbs of the correct size, and we are trying to keep that damage from happening to the young trees. Older trees can survive. In fact, the cicada damage may actually help them to prune and set more fruit next year. Mr. Banneker said, then the egg by some occult cause emerges to a great depth in the earth, and there continues for the space of 17 years, as aforesaid. Mr. Banneker did not have access to the same sorts of cameras and lenses that we do, so he would not have been able to see the next steps as well as we can. If he misses the hatching, it will not happen for another 17 years. All right. We now know that other broods hatch each year. Every year there is a brood of periodic cicadas that hatches somewhere, but he would not. You won't see them hatch in the same spot for another 17 years. So if you miss it, it's gone. After a few weeks, the tiny baby cicada hatch and fall from the branch to the earth. They'll burrow under the ground and stay there for the next 17 years. And the cycle starts anew.
Cicadas Song. Author Kumsang Changtalansan. Illustrator Vongsavan Damlonsok. Little Cicada loved to sing, but her song was always the same. She wanted to learn a new song. So she decided to visit Kingfisher to learn to sing his song. Do-oo-oo, do-oo-oo, sang Kingfisher. But little Cicada could not sing his song. She then visited Mina. Maybe she could learn to sing Mina's song. Kayak, 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 sang Mina. But Cicada could not sing Mina's song. She then visited Cricket. Cicada was determined to learn a new song. Crick, 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 sang Cricket. But Cicada could not sing Cricket's song either. Then it started to rain. The duck sang, quack, quack, quack. Frog came out and croaked, ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. All the animals came out, and they sang their songs. Do-oo-oo, do-oo-oo, kayak, 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 crick, 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 quack, 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 ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. Cicada listened to all the songs. None of the other songs sounded like hers. So she started to sing, "Ya-ing, ya-ing, ya-ing." All the animals sang together. Do-oo-oo, do-oo-oo. Kayak, kayak, kayak. Kirk, 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 kirk. Quack, quack, quack. Ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. Ya-ing, ya-ing, ya-ing. Since then, Cicada enjoyed her song. Sometimes she even makes up new songs that only she can sing.